Hope you're having a good Sunday morning. Plugged into Long Island here on 102.3 WBAB and 106.1 BLI. My name is Ted Linder. And this morning, Melissa Negrin-Wiener is with us. She's a partner in Genzer, Dubow, Genzer, and Kona. Law offices in Melville. Here this morning to talk about elder care, seniors, and also the disabled, and also to talk about some of the changes now that we have a new administration in Washington with President Donald Trump being inaugurated back on January 20th. Good morning. I know it's early on a Sunday, but thanks for coming in this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you guys specialize in over there at Genzer, Dubow, Genzer, and Kona in Melville, and we'll go from there.
Okay, we're an estate planning and elder law firm, and we handle everything from asset protection and estate planning for people at any age to Medicaid planning, Medicaid applications, guardianship work, estate administration, and litigation. So we really run the gamut of anything and everything elder law.
Right. Important for people to have all of this stuff in line, when that time comes, right, for, when people, pass away, and a lot of people, don't necessarily have their wills up to date and things taken care of, right? It's very important that everybody gets that in line, correct?
It's very important, and it's important for people of any age because there are reasons at every stage in life that you need to plan. Everybody needs a power of attorney and a healthcare proxy and a living will because it doesn't matter if you're elderly or sick. Something could happen to anybody at any time. Right.
And I always think back to the infamous case back in 2005 of Terri Schiavo.
Exactly.
The Terri Schiavo was the one that really, I guess, kind of brought, to the forefront all of these issues and probably got a lot of people to think about, what they want to have happen if, God forbid, they should end up in a situation like that. Terri Schiavo, of course, was on a feeding tube. And there was a big debate between her family who wanted to keep her alive and her husband who felt that it was time for her to let her go. And it turned into a whole political mess and everything else that came of it. But the bottom line was that she didn't have this all laid out ahead of time. And that was where the controversy had come up, right?
Absolutely. And because she was a young woman, she didn't have these documents in place. And it's very common for us. We see it all the time that people just don't have these documents, people in their 70s and 80s, but also people in their 20s and 30s and 40s. It's
right.
Anybody over 18 should have these documents in place. Just like Terri Schiavo, things can happen.
And it was unfortunate that it turned into a big political football because then it turned into a whole the definition of life and right to die. But the issue of having all of this stuff together before you get into a situation like that was definitely something that a lot of people could learn from the Terri Schiavo case if you want to Google that to see more of what we're talking about. Back to you, though, Melissa Negrin-Wiener with us, partner in Genzer, Dubow, Genzer, and Kona in Melville, talking about elder care, the seniors and disabled. Let's talk a little bit about some of those changes regarding some of those government benefits that are going to affect seniors and the disabled now with a new administration in Washington, or as they like to say, a new sheriff in town.
Well, a lot of what we do at our office is planning for Medicaid and long-term care. And some of the biggest concerns that we're having now is that there could potentially be an increase in the look-back period or a look-back period put into place for Medicaid home care benefits where Medicaid would look back to see if you've divested yourself of any of your assets or gifted any of your assets and penalize you, where now if somebody needs Medicaid home care benefits, that does not happen. Another concern is also the possibility of them doing away with the spousal refusal for home care benefits. So,
explain what that is.
In New York State, you can transfer your assets to your spouse if you need to go on Medicaid benefits, and there's no penalty for doing that. They don't penalize you for making those transfers like they would if you transferred to a child or a niece or a nephew.
Okay.
So you can always, with spouses, you can always get the first spouse on Medicaid with really no issue by transferring everything to what we call the well spouse. The well spouse then has to sign something called spousal refusal if they then have more money than they're allowed to, according to the Medicaid guidelines.
Okay.
Spousal refusal basically just says I have more than I'm allowed to, but I can't make it available because I need it to live on. I mean, it's not inexpensive to live in New York. We all know that. So right now, we're allowed to do spousal refusal, and it does give the counties the right to go back to the spouse later on and ask for a contribution towards care or even bring a lawsuit against the spouse. But some of what we're hearing that might potentially happen is doing away with spousal refusal. So we'll no longer have that ability to make the first spouse eligible for Medicaid by transferring to the well spouse.
Interesting. Now, what about for people that have already done their planning for possible home care or nursing care? Are they protected? Are they grandfathered into the old plan? How does that work?
Well, we're certainly hoping that they will be grandfathered in, and we anticipate it. In the past, anytime there's been some major changes to the rules and the regulations, anybody who's already done their planning was grandfathered in. So we anticipate that people who do their planning earlier will be, and that's part of what we're trying to get the word out about, to plan, now, to get things done now before these changes start taking place.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about Medicaid planning. What's involved in that long-term and for long-term care?
Well, it's different for everybody. So people who come in who are generally healthy and just want to do some estate or long-term care planning, they're similar. And we would talk about doing an irrevocable trust, transferring some of the assets, especially the home on Long Island is usually the largest asset, into an irrevocable trust to protect that asset. So for Medicaid purposes right now, you could transfer a house to an irrevocable trust. Depending on your other assets, you could be eligible for home care right away. There's no look back period.
Right.
But for nursing home care, you need to start that. There's a 5-year look back. You need to start that 5-year clock.
Okay.
So we certainly recommend for people to start doing this planning when, that 5 years isn't going to be an issue.
Right.
More than likely is not going to be an issue. We see people all the time that come in 80s and 90s who haven't done the planning, and we have to do other things. But for people who are in their mid-50s, their early 60s, they should really think about the idea of setting up an irrevocable trust and potentially transferring at least the house, if not other assets, depending on what they have. A lot of times people will come to me and say, well, can't I just give everything to my children? Mm-hmm. And we don't really recommend that, because once you start transferring assets to another person,
right,
now you're making that asset vulnerable to anything going on in that person's life.
Right.
They get sued if they have creditors, if they have kids in college on financial aid. So the irrevocable trust is really the smartest way to do it.
Right. Now, when should the planning for all of this begin? Should people be doing it from a very young age? I mean, they should obviously always be looking at the future. But what's a good age to start?
I always tell people when I do seminars and things that any major life changes should cause you to take a look at this. Just because it's called elder law doesn't mean it's for the elderly. So people who, first buy their home and have children, they need to have wills, right? To make sure that if something happens to them, their children are going to who they want them to go to.
Right.
They need to have a power of attorney and a healthcare proxy and a living will in case, God forbid, they're in some sort of catastrophic accident or they have an illness. So, that's as young as 20, 21, 22. I mean, anything can happen.
Right.
And then as their, life continues now, they get a new job. Maybe they're earning more money. Maybe they want to start looking at planning for college and things like that for their children. They may want to revisit this. And as we tell people, they should revisit their estate plan every 2-3 years. And by the time they're in their 50s, they should really be thinking about perhaps setting up the irrevocable trust and transferring the house and other assets.
Right. Plugged into Long Island this morning, talking with Melissa Negrin-Wiener, a partner at Genzer, Dubow, Genzer, and Kona in Melville, talking about elder care, the seniors, disabled, some of the things that are going to be changing with the new administration now in Washington, and also talking about just planning for the future. Do you guys have a website that you can give out for people, what we're talking about this morning, where they could get more information?
Sure. Our website is www.genserlaw.com. It's GENSERLAW.com. And you can also request a guide to elder law and estate planning on our website. There's actually a download version, or you can request a hard copy to be mailed to you. And that is full of information regarding all of the things we're speaking about.
Sounds good. I want to talk a little bit about spousal refusal and how it protects the well spouse. Tell us a little bit more about that. Okay,
so if a typical couple in their 70s, 80s, one spouse gets sick, they go to the hospital. From the hospital, they go to rehab, and they have a little bit of coverage for the rehab through Medicare. So Medicare, which everybody has over 65, pays the first 20 days in full. And then from days 21 to 100, there may or may not be a copay depending on your supplemental insurance. But after day 20, Medicare can cut you off anytime if they feel like you're not progressing with your rehab.
Okay.
So at that point, the spouse in the rehab will then become, if they don't go home, a long-term care resident of that particular facility, so that nursing home, or they go to a different nursing home. So now they're in a facility that's going to cost them anywhere from, I don't know, $12,000 to $16,000 a month, maybe even more.
Right.
Okay, for long-term care.
Money's going to run out fast, or it's going to go pretty quick, right?
Very quickly, very quickly. So with spousal refusal, one of the things that we're able to do is transfer the assets, so the home, any liquid assets and CDs and money markets, brokerage accounts, not retirement money. Okay, retirement money, Medicaid doesn't count towards eligibility purposes. So we're just talking about non-retirement money. We can transfer that all to the well spouse and get the first spouse that's in the nursing home on Medicaid. So Medicaid can pay the nursing home, and the spouse that's in the community can hold on to the assets because that spouse is still paying for upkeep on the house.
Right.
They're still paying for all the regular
Right.
bills and needs. And like we said, it's really expensive to
Right, and
live
to make sure
here.
that well spouse doesn't fall through the cracks then or lose everything, correct? Like, or have, their house go into foreclosure or whatever else can happen.
Or they have to start applying for other government benefits like
Right,
food
right.
stamps and HEAP. And then really, what are we doing? It's like a vicious cycle.
Right.
So the spousal refusal allowed that spouse to hold on to whatever assets they had. Now, that spouse, like I said earlier, the county has a right to come back to that spouse later and say, hey, you had more than you were allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
So we've paid X amount for your wife, let's say, and we want you to fork over X amount of dollars.
Right.
And that does happen.
Right.
So there may be some negotiation there, some sort of reimbursement that's set up, but at least it's not going to be that $16,000 a month.
Right. Is there a lot of fraud with this? It seems like a lot of money would get lost.
Well, when we do Medicaid applications as attorneys, obviously we have to document every single thing that goes on. So when I submit an application for Medicaid, I'm looking at 5 years of bank records, and I have to tell the Department of Social Services where all of this money went. So if it went to the spouse, we can clearly show the transfer between the two bank accounts. But sometimes people don't know where money went because, hey, it's 5 years ago,
Right.
right? And so they might not have receipts. They might not have backup. So we have to do the best we can to get the information. But in some cases, the Department of Social Services will count that transaction as a gift, which will create a penalty, a short period of time where the person might not be eligible for Medicaid benefits.
Right. Let's talk about advance directives. What advance directives should seniors have?
So I can't stress enough that everybody over 18 should have a power of attorney, a healthcare proxy, and a living will.
Okay, so not just seniors, everybody, like we talked about before. Okay.
Right, even you.
All right, yeah. And I don't as of now, so this is good that we're doing this interview. We'll get that all together.
So a power of attorney is a document where you name someone to make financial decisions for you. So if you have an accident or an illness and you've become incapacitated mentally and you can no longer handle bill pay, you can no longer handle your bank accounts or anything really, anything financial, your power of attorney, your agent's going to step in and do that for you. So you have to make sure, obviously, it's somebody that you trust, somebody that you know is going to do right by you. And that's the power of attorney. The healthcare proxy is a document where you name someone to make healthcare decisions for you. So similar to what we were talking about with Terri Schiavo, somebody who is going to step in and make healthcare decisions when you can no longer communicate what your wishes are. So as long as you can communicate your own wishes, even if you're sick, the doctor's going to listen to you.
Right.
They don't want to listen to anybody else. They want to listen to you. But if you can't communicate your wishes anymore, then your healthcare agent's going to step into your shoes in that case. And in New York State, you can't have more than one healthcare agent at a time. So you have to name one person, and you can have a backup. With the financials, with the power of attorney, you can have more than one person.
And family members should definitely always be involved in this process, always, right? And how do people decide, though, who's in charge of this? Like, what's the best plan of action going forward with that?
It's going to be different for everybody. I mean, a lot of times when I deal with older people, they feel badly. They don't want to leave anybody out. They don't want to make one of their children feel bad or feel left out. And I try to explain to them, listen, you need to pick the person who maybe is a little bit more financially savvy for the power of attorney. And you need to pick the person with the health care that you know is going to follow your wishes, even if it's really difficult for them to do.
Right.
And, in some cases, families will have somebody who's in the financial industry, a child, or somebody who's in the medical industry. So I do try to explain that to them. Sometimes it doesn't matter what you say. They just want to get all the kids on there. And so we do the best we can. It's also really important to have a living will, which is a document where you state your end-of-life wishes. Do you want to be kept alive on machines, feeding tubes, or not?
Right.
So you have the ability to make that choice while you have the capacity to do it and put it down on paper.
Has to be it's probably one of those things that everybody really has to do, and a lot of people don't really want to deal with. Do you have any, just for people to try and motivate anybody out there that's listening right now that doesn't have this done yet? I mean, you must deal with some messy situations too where this stuff is not, but we talked about Terri Schiavo before, but do you have any cases where things have just gotten really out of control, where families are ripped apart or fighting because this all wasn't down on paper? Or maybe even when stuff is laid out, there's all sorts of issues that still come up. But at least if you have everything documented legally, there's nothing anybody can really do, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the horror stories really revolve around guardianship proceedings. So if somebody becomes mentally incapacitated and there's no power of attorney, there's no healthcare proxy in place, and things need to happen, especially a lot of times for Medicaid purposes, assets need to be transferred or somebody needs to be moved from a hospital to a nursing home. There's nobody with the authority to make those decisions. So in cases like that, we have to bring a guardianship proceeding through the court system. So we file a petition. It gets submitted to the court saying this person doesn't have capacity, this is why, and they need somebody appointed for them. And then we have to go through the process of the court appoints somebody to come in and interview the whole family, make a determination if the person needs a guardian, who the guardian should be. And sometimes they're really, really cut and dry. Everybody's on the same page. Everybody gets along. Mom just never wanted to sign these documents, so we have to go through the motions of getting a guardian in place.
Right.
But even those cases can get really, really expensive.
Right.
Okay? More often than not, when we're in the guardianship world, it's not cut and dry. It's children fighting with each other, who stole money, who did this, who did that.
Right.
And so now you're airing your dirty laundry, right? You're in court, you're on the stand, everybody's going against each other. And, in my experience, you just don't come back from that. The families don't survive
they get ripped apart.
Those. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. People don't talk to each other ever again.
And I've had cases where there's 5 or 6 children and each one has their own lawyer. So now this whole thing is costing $100,000 in legal fees and court filing fees and everything else, just because you could have signed those couple of documents and avoided all of that.
Right. Explain for people that may not know the death tax. How does that work? Like for people, is it that when if somebody dies and they leave assets to like a beneficiary, are they taxed on that money after that person dies?
No. So, estate tax right now is $5 million. So it's going up. And
this is all subject to change, I guess, obviously.
Right. Well, that's another one of the changes that could be coming down the pike is just getting rid of estate tax.
Okay.
So right now, the majority of people don't fall into a situation where they're going to have federal estate tax. They could have New York State estate tax.
Okay.
So, but the person who you pay taxes on the estate, so it is less to your heirs. Right?
Okay.
But when your heirs come into the money, that's not income to them. They're not paying income tax on that money. It's an inheritance.
Okay.
So that's one of the things that people kind of confuse. Like they think they're going to have to pay income tax on all of this money that they're receiving from their family members. It's not income.
Okay, great. I'm glad to ask. Melissa Negrin-Wiener with us, a partner at Genzer, Dubow, Genzer & Kona in Melville, talking about elder care, seniors, and the disabled, taking care of them, planning for the future, some changes that could be coming down the pike. Do you foresee a mess with the changes that could be coming? I mean, or is it just, part of, the administration comes in, a new one comes in, they change, and you guys are out in front of this? You're all fully prepared for whatever comes down the pike?
Yeah, we try to anticipate what could happen and how to deal with it before it happens. We've certainly been through major changes before, like when the look back went from 3 years to 5 years and the start dates of the penalty periods changed. In 2006, and we adjusted for, what we needed to do. And I'm sure we'll do the same thing this time. It's just, back then in 2006 and now we're really trying to get the word out to people that right now everything is status quo. So let's get the planning done. Let's get things in place and make sure that if there are these major changes, we can keep people grandfathered in.
Excellent. And one more time, give out the website where people can get more information on all of this and also contact information for you.
Sure. The website is www.genserlaw.com. That's GENSERLAW.com. Phone number 631-390-5000. And again, people can either call or go on the website to request a guide to elder law and estate planning.
Excellent. Thanks for coming in this morning. A lot of good information and very important for everybody. Stress once again how important it is for everybody to get all of their paperwork and everything together, for when that time comes when it's needed. I
really can't stress it enough. It's so important that even children who are, turn 18 and go to college, they need to have these documents in place. If they need their parents' help, their parents can no longer help them once they're 18.
Wow.
Just because they're their parents,
right,
they need to have the documents in place. So I really can't stress it enough to get your documents in place, your planning done, and, make sure you have it all put together. It's
really amazing. You don't think about this stuff when you're like 18, 19, even 25, 30. 40, then you never know what can happen from day to day. But definitely lots of good information and definitely a lot of stuff to think about. And everybody should be that's listening this morning taking your advice and getting it done. And hopefully you get a lot of phone calls.
Hope so. Thank
All
you.
Right. Thanks for coming in this morning.
Thanks so much.
Once again, Melissa Negrin-Wiener, a partner at Genzer, Dubow, Genzer, and Kona in Melville. Their fundamental goal to provide the highest quality legal services available anywhere, emphasizing the personal component of client service, where ongoing communication with clients is the key to their success, and they remain available and accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you have any questions about what we discussed this morning, planning for the future, elder care, taking care of the seniors and the disabled, and some of the things that may change with the new administration in Washington, you can call them at 631-390-5000. That's 631-390-5000. Online at genserlaw.com. That's GENSERLAW.com. My thanks to Melissa Negrin-Wiener for coming in this morning, being plugged into Long Island. My name is Ted Linder. Hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Enjoy your Sunday.